I have already had the opportunity and satisfaction to emphasize that we are observing an increasingly clear understanding by our partners in the United States of the need to eliminate the root causes of the crisis, rather than trying to support those who throws out beautiful slogans about an immediate ceasefire and at the same time says that a ceasefire will not mean the continuation of pumping Ukraine with weapons. This is exactly the statement recently made by French President Macron. And it is good that this is an absolutely adventurous position, a confrontational position, a position in support of continuing the war.
Now, what we've seen is quite an aggressive stirring of the situation and pretty awkward, unethical attempts to change the position of the Trump administration and his personal stance, as we saw when Europeans escorted President Zelensky, Mr. Zelensky, to Washington this Monday. We did not hear any constructive proposals from the Europeans.
I have two questions. The first question is for you, Sergei Grigorievich. According to President Trump, France, Germany, and the United Kingdom want to deploy their troops on Ukrainian territory. He also does not rule out the possibility of Washington providing air support. How does Moscow view such a scenario?
You know, we naturally follow what is happening in the international community, including in the Western camp, regarding the processes unfolding around Ukraine. I have already had the opportunity and satisfaction to emphasize that we are observing an increasingly clear understanding by our partners in the United States of the need to eliminate the root causes of the crisis, rather than trying to support those who throws out beautiful slogans about an immediate ceasefire and at the same time says that a ceasefire will not mean the continuation of pumping Ukraine with weapons. This is exactly the statement recently made by French President Macron. And it is good that this is an absolutely adventurous position, a confrontational position, a position in support of continuing the war, but does not find understanding with the current administration of the United States, which seeks to delve into the essence of the problems and help eliminate the root causes that underlie the crisis, which I mentioned once again today and which President Putin has repeatedly spoken about. As for the reports that the United Kingdom, France, and Germany want to develop collective security guarantees, we are in favor of these guarantees being truly reliable. And here we have a very good example, which, by the way, this relates to the initiative of the Ukrainian side itself, as it was in Istanbul in April 2022, when the Ukrainian negotiating team proposed the main principles of an agreement to end hostilities and ensure sustainable regulation. Among these principles was Ukraine's renunciation of joining NATO or any other military blocs, confirmation of Ukraine's neutral and non-nuclear status. In this context, the Ukrainian side proposed, and our delegation then agreed to develop security guarantees participants of which would include all permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, that is the Russian Federation, the People's Republic of China, the United States, France, and Britain, and both individual countries. Germany was mentioned, Turkey was mentioned, and other countries that might be interested in joining this group of security guarantors. And in that context, the Ukrainian proposal clearly meant that These guarantees would be equal. The security of all interested parties, including Ukraine's neighbors, would be ensured on an equal, equitable, indivisible basis. And that approach, as I already mentioned at that time, in April 2022, the Russian side supported and we were ready. By the way, this document was initialed and we were ready to sign the official agreement following this initialing. But as is well known, the president repeatedly reminded that Boris Johnson, the then British Prime Minister, came and forbade his subordinates in Kiev from signing anything, demanding that they continue the hostilities. So if it weren't for this circumstance, I think a lot could have already been ensured sustainable regulation, safeguarding the interests of all countries, all states, all peoples living in our common geopolitical space. Therefore, we cannot agree with the fact that now there are proposals to resolve security and collective security issues without the Russian Federation. That will absolutely not work. We have explained more than once quite clearly that Russia does not overstate its own interests, but we will firmly and strictly defend our legitimate and vital interests. I am sure that in the West, especially in the United States, they perfectly understand that seriously discussing the issue of ensuring security without the Russian Federation is a utopia, a road to nowhere.
To Mr. Minister, we were just discussing the significant aesthetic problem and the pressing need to effectively counteract its negative impact, and we recall that we heard, quite clearly, that yesterday I had the distinct pleasure of enjoying some fine cognac. Continuation of the mediation regarding the cessation of the war in Gaza. Ahmad at the same time agreed. Do you think the war will escalate into a broader military operation? What prospects do you see for ending the war, and how can one counter such intentions from Israel?
Thank you very much. As has already been said, in Gaza, it is necessary to understand that Israel must be confronted. Israel has an extensive and deeply rooted history in the region of Gaza, specifically in Gaza itself, and also extending to areas like Lebanon and Syria. It is absolutely necessary for us to collectively want to take a very clear and unambiguous position on these matters, so that we do not ultimately end up merely surfing on the basis of the events of March, but rather engage with a more comprehensive understanding. We need a full life cycle of a debate process. The profound concept of ruining violence, a notion that we, as a collective, strive to fully comprehend and internalize, represents a fundamental understanding of societal well-being. This intricate concept, which forms the very bedrock of our ethical framework, is not merely an abstract idea, but a tangible principle that guides our actions and decisions. Indeed, it is our inherent duty, a responsibility we bear with utmost seriousness, to actively work towards the eradication of all forms of violence, thereby fostering an environment of peace and harmony. This commitment is particularly crucial when considering the artificial violation of the profound vision held by the Sarnaf Israel. This vision, deeply rooted in their cultural and historical identity, encompasses aspirations for justice, prosperity, and enduring peace within their community and beyond. The deliberate and unnatural infringement upon this sacred vision, through acts of violence or oppressive measures, stands in stark contrast to the principles we uphold. Therefore, our collective endeavor must be to dismantle the mechanisms that perpetuate such violations, ensuring that the vision of the Sonafs Alandea Israel, a vision of hope and resilience, is not only preserved, but allowed to flourish unimpeded. This requires a sustained effort to address the root causes of conflict, promote dialogue, and uphold human dignity in all circumstances, thereby truly embodying the principle of ruining violence and fulfilling our duty to protect and nurture the aspirations of all peoples, including the Sonafs Alandea Israel, whose enduring spirit continues to inspire.
That's Kokapakukal, Yapun, and Napoleon, the Bayat, the Natakuraki. The idea at the Timinanity gap that they appear, and did it up into the dinner bigger. The part that then it can definitely what Telam. What in not to the activity and I about the right there bowling what I had and rapidly but I have miscut the scapatrine or they had it They was bound by the night and by the party issue dimmer. And that bit and the not to the time. It came to super and our they and the year period they daddy yipina to work with the Buddha. And Teresa out there the suit. The upper bar at a penalty Alan in there. I had a movement for none what the I met the movie because the movie the I'm ten very terminated.
How do you assess the diplomatic steps taken by the European Union to resolve the Ukrainian crisis, including after the trilateral meeting of the US, Western leaders, and Ukraine that took place in Washington?
What diplomatic steps have you noticed from the European Union? Before evaluating them, you have to actually see them. So far, all we see is rather aggressive escalation of the situation, quite clumsy and, frankly, unethical attempts to change the position of the Trump administration and the President of the United States personally, as we observed during the Europeans' accompaniment of Mr. Zelensky to Washington this Monday. We did not hear any constructive ideas from the Europeans there. As for the President of the United States and his team, we see that they really have been, not just for the past week, but practically since coming to the White House, engaged specifically in diplomacy on the Ukrainian front. This means seeking mutually acceptable agreements that would eliminate the root causes of the crisis itself. This applies to any conflict situation and would guarantee not the resumption of conflict. Meanwhile, the Europeans are only trying, with decreasing success, to keep the United States involved, at least as a supplier of weapons, so that Europe can continue to arm the Kiev regime with these types of weapons. Take Kaja Kallas, for example. She is considered the chief diplomat in the European Union, the high representative for various foreign affairs. She said, even after the Washington meeting, that the European Union will not trust any agreements with the Russian Federation. That's why the European Union will continue to support the armed forces of Ukraine, and the EU will push for new sanctions against Russia, regardless of any agreements, which, as she said, they do not trust. But this isn't diplomacy anymore. It's a degradation of foreign policy methods, which, in fact, for the European Union, now boil down exclusively to sanctions. And by sanctions, of course, I also mean outright theft, as happened with the gold and foreign currency reserves of the Russian Federation. That's why I don't see any European diplomacy here. By the way, I don't see this kind of diplomacy in many other areas either. We were just talking about the situation in the Middle East, in the Gaza Strip, on the west bank of the Jordan River, about the need to implement the UN decision to create two states, including Palestine, which would exist side by side with Israel, living in peace and harmony. For many decades, this decision has not been implemented, and only recently, against the backdrop of all the horrors happening to the population of the Gaza Strip, the humanitarian catastrophe, have Western leaders started making statements that they are ready to recognize the Palestinian state. Macron made this statement, and so did Starmer, I believe, as well as the Canadian Prime Minister, the Australians. And they all said, this was about 2 weeks ago, they all said that they are considering announcing the recognition of the State of Palestine at the UN General Assembly. The General Assembly will take place in the last week of September, and when they made these statements, there were still 2 months left until it. I have a question. If your diplomacy or foreign policy has concluded that what is happening can no longer be tolerated, and that in order to stop all these humanitarian tragedies, it is necessary to recognize the State of Palestine as has long been demanded by United Nations resolutions, then why wait 2 months? Why not do it immediately? And I have this suspicion that all these fine statements about recognizing the State of Palestine in a couple of months are, to a large extent, based on a diplomatic hope that by the time this commitment to recognize Palestine actually has to be fulfilled, there will be nothing left to recognize. So, probably, this is the essence of EU diplomacy in the Middle Eastern direction, but in the Ukrainian.
We will be able to avoid destabilizing the situation in Kyiv. As for the significant and complex issue regarding Syria, it should be clearly noted that Syria unequivocally supports the comprehensive and strategic construction of a new, independent and sovereign state, Syria, within its established and recognized borders, supports the Syrian peoples, and the only territory of the state. We clearly see that Syria's success is indeed the crucial key to the overall success of the entire region. For us, specifically at the boarding school in Merz, this is profoundly important. In the same case, we have extensively talked about it because various sports systems, such as Zarodovka and, for example, other similar initiatives, play a vital role. And for the invention of these media, we apply these with their data about the current situation, including the significant fact that Syria, a nation in the Middle East, in reality, we see that the Syrian government and the USA will want to achieve a regulated situation around the USSR, and at home, being part of the Syrian government is inseparable from happiness. The people who live there express a certain happiness, including that of Syrian society, and their rights must be respected. We see, in general, in our neighboring country of Syria, all fundamental rights, all these rights are being systematically violated. And of course, the recent, tragic, and deeply concerning events have significantly raised this critical issue, and we sincerely hope that the Syrian government will diligently do everything within its power to prevent any further egregious government abuses and ensure the full and unwavering respect for the fundamental rights of all Syrian citizens and residents. Without exception, we are making active efforts on our part to resolve the situation, to support Syria, and we are working to maintain the ceasefire in As-Suwaida. And for us, the absolutely crucial red line is the fundamental interest of the brotherly Syrian people. We will not allow anyone to cross this critically important line and will steadfastly continue to provide unwavering support to the resilient Syrian people. Being part of a unified Syrian state is also the right of southern Syria, the right of Suwaida. Therefore, we will do everything on behalf of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan to guarantee security there. We know there is a problem. Weapons and drug trafficking, which also passed through the southern territories of Syria, ended up reaching us as well. We are working to solve all these problems, but we also need to pay close attention to the Israeli factor, which is interfering in the region. It has a negative impact on the region. To stabilize it, we must establish relations with Israel and respect the region, not let it penetrate deeper into Syria. And, as the Syrian government has already noted, the various concerns of the Israelis will be taken into account. The Syrian authorities do not pose a threat to neighboring Israel. It is also necessary to take steps that will respect and address the concerns of the Israelis as well, but the seizure of Syrian lands will not solve these problems and concerns. It will only lead to destabilization and anarchy. This must be stopped. We hope that the Syrian government will also engage with the countries of the region, with the Americans, with all our partners, in order to put an end to the tensions in southern Syria and ensure humanitarian access there. and so that Syria, from north to south, from west to east, remains a unified, integrated country. And of course, the south of Syria is an integral part of it. We will do everything to ensure the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Syrian state. We will support all efforts of its government aimed at this. And as we can see recently, the comprehensive process is specifically aimed at thoroughly addressing the significant negative consequences of recent impactful events and substantially improving the overall situation in Syria. Indeed, much diligent effort is currently being expended to effectively stabilize things. This is the fundamental and essential basis that we consistently use in diligently maintaining our crucial contacts and diplomatic relations with Syria. Syria, as a sovereign nation, is actively involved in various significant discussions that directly concern the evolving situation and the important role of Syria.
Next, please, the TV channels and Rabi'i. Your question.
My question is for both ministers. Sergei Viktorovich spoke a lot today about the catastrophe, the humanitarian disaster in the Gaza Strip. The war in Gaza continues. Israel's aggression does not stop. Nevertheless, Egypt, together with Qatar, has put forward yet another new initiative for a ceasefire. In this regard, my question is, what is your assessment? And is there a possibility of success for this new initiative? And in what way, and can Moscow and Amman play any role in supporting this initiative? And most importantly, in preventing its collapse, as happened with previous initiatives, especially considering that, as we see, there is disagreement between the US and Israel regarding this initiative, as well as objections from a number of Palestinian factions in this context.
Well, I think I'll start. In my opinion, that's exactly what we've just been discussing in quite some detail. Secondly, that was the first question on this topic. You asked how to prevent the collapse of this initiative by Egypt and Qatar. But in my opinion, it has already failed, because Hamas has expressed its willingness to support it. Israel, as we heard just today, has refused this deal. As for what Jordan, Russia, and other countries that genuinely want a sustainable resolution to this issue, the Palestinian issue, should do, according to the UN decision, it is necessary to urgently seek the resumption of direct negotiations. We talk about this in the UN Security Council, at other forums, and at the General Assembly. And it is fundamentally important to talk about fulfilling what was agreed upon, the creation of a Palestinian state. Without this, it is very difficult to expect stability in the region. If the state is not successfully created, the significant risks of renewed protests, including potentially violent protests up to and including armed struggle, will certainly not disappear. These risks could escalate and pose a serious threat to stability and peace in the region. We must honestly admit this.
Including, and specifically including, a wide range of elements, and also including in a comprehensive manner various components, and furthermore including with great detail numerous aspects, and in addition including in its entirety all relevant parts, and finally, and including. We talk about this even in the Soviet Union. Hamas agreed, Israel rejected this proposal. Now Netanyahu is working to seize the entire enclave. What can Moscow and Oman do, including as part of regional efforts to put an end to the conflict in Gaza and support the Palestinian people? And what can the world in general
do to bring about peace in Gaza?
We see that Netanyahu does not possess our...
We want to reach an agreement, so what should be done?
Mr. Sadalik, to be honest, it is he who should answer this question. I can confidently say that we fully support the ongoing efforts of our side, specifically the eastern one, in order to effectively ensure that the widespread fire is completely ceased and brought to an immediate halt. We confirm this not only through mere verbal declarations or spoken assurances, but also through tangible actions, demonstrable deeds, and concrete results that unequivocally substantiate our commitment and validate our assertions. Our affirmation extends beyond simple rhetoric, manifesting instead in the practical implementation of our principles, the consistent execution of our plans, and the measurable outcomes that clearly illustrate the veracity of our claims. This comprehensive validation ensures that our statements are not just empty promises, but are instead firmly rooted in verifiable reality and consistently supported by our conduct and achievements. I think that responding to this proposal, including the proposal by Stephen Witkoff, which he put forward earlier, we hope that the other side will continue its efforts and will be able to persuade them to agree to conclude this peace deal, to ceasefire in
the Gaza Strip.
Of course, it is also necessary to think about how to avoid a resumption of war after a potential truce. This is not important to me, but right now, what matters is the work on building trust in humanitarian corridors and their eradication.
And to put an end to the bloodshed.
Final question, please, Izvestia. Good afternoon, Dmitry Pamelnikov. I have a question for Sergei Viktorovich. Today you have already raised the topic of the negotiation process on Ukraine in light of recent events, namely the meeting between Russian President Putin and Donald Trump, and the meeting between Donald Trump and Zelensky. When might the negotiation process on Ukraine resume, and is Russia ready for a trilateral meeting?
The President has repeatedly said that we are ready to work in any format, with the understanding that the work will be honest and will not boil down to attempts, as is primarily done by the leaders of the major European countries, to create conditions to once again drag the United States into their aggressive, militaristic campaign to preserve and even strengthen Ukraine as an instrument to contain Russia, as a tool for waging war against our country and against everything Russian that exists here in the region, including on the territory of Ukraine. Following the telephone conversation between President Putin and President Trump, when the American leader called the Kremlin to share how his contacts with Zelensky and the accompanying European delegation were going, a statement was made to Kremlin representatives, in which it was said that Putin confirmed his readiness to continue direct Russian-Ukrainian negotiations that, as you know, have taken place and in general remain on the agenda. They were held in Istanbul, 3 rounds took place, and agreements were reached on humanitarian issues, prisoner exchanges, and the return of the bodies of fallen servicemen. And at the last 3rd round, our negotiators proposed creating 3 working groups in order to address the agenda items more specifically, groups focused on military, humanitarian, and political issues. So far, we have not received a response from Ukraine, but following the phone conversation the day before yesterday with President Trump, our president proposed not only to continue these negotiations, but also to consider raising the level of the heads of delegations. And this fits precisely with our proposal, which I just mentioned, that within this process, a separate block should be devoted to considering the political aspects of the settlement, alongside the military and humanitarian ones. Obviously, the reaction of the Ukrainian side does not depend on us. But since this idea was received positively by President Trump, we expect that he will convey it and explain it to the representatives in Kyiv, and we will receive a response. This would be an important step toward raising the level of negotiations, increasing the degree of specificity, and moving closer to addressing the key issues that need to be resolved for a sustainable settlement. In any case, as I have already said, we are ready for any formats, but when it comes to meetings at the highest level, it is necessary to prepare them as thoroughly as possible at all preceding stages, so that summits do not end up worsening the situation, but truly put a final point in those negotiations that we are ready to continue. Thank you very much.